U.S. President Donald Trump is once again the disruptor at a G7 summit in Canada. He's also once again muddied the outlook on Canada-U.S. trade.
The latest tariffs on steel and aluminum are unjustified. They're illegal. They're bad for American workers.
Donald Trump poses a clear threat to American democracy, to Canadian sovereignty, and to the international rule of law.
What happens when your best friend becomes your biggest threat? For decades, Canada and the United States shared one of the strongest alliances in the world, built on trust, trade, and shared values. But today, that alliance is shattering. Canada is no longer treating the U.S. as an ally. And at the center of this diplomatic crisis stands two men: Donald Trump, the self-styled strongman president, and Mark Carney, the calm but cunning prime minister of a nation on edge. This isn't just another summit. This isn't just another spat. This is a battle for economic survival, national dignity, and the soul of a country that's tired of being pushed around. Just days before the world's leaders were set to gather for the G7 summit, Donald Trump didn't send a message of diplomacy. He sent a threat. Instead of preparing for meaningful dialogue, the U.S. president turned up the pressure, proposing devastating tariffs on Canada's auto industry. 35%, even 50%. For Canada, this wasn't political posturing. It was economic warfare. These weren't theoretical numbers. They were knives aimed at the heart of Canada's economy, its auto sector, steel, and manufacturing backbone. Entire communities stood to lose jobs, income, and stability, all because one man decided confrontation was more useful than cooperation. Trump wasn't negotiating. He was strong-arming, using tariffs not as tools but as weapons. There was no compromise on the table, only a demand: bend or break. He wasn't walking into the summit with a handshake. He was kicking the door in. But this wasn't just about economics. It was personal. Canada and the United States weren't just neighbors. They were family. For generations, the two countries stood side by side through wars, trade agreements, and cultural exchange. Their economies were deeply intertwined. Their citizens shared values, and trust was a given. But under Donald Trump, that trust didn't just erode, it shattered. His aggressive tactics weren't the moves of a partner. They were the actions of a bully. Threatening industries that support millions of Canadian families wasn't policy. It was punishment. The towns that rely on auto plants, the workers who count on cross-border trade, the businesses built on cooperation, all were suddenly placed in the crosshairs. And the most unsettling part? Trump knew exactly what he was doing. These weren't unintended consequences. This was a deliberate strike on an ally, to send a message: loyalty doesn't matter. Only submission does. And yet the more damage he did, the louder his supporters cheered. Enter Mark Carney, Canada's newly appointed Prime Minister, a man known not for grandstanding but for precision. While Trump stormed into the spotlight, shouting threats and seeking dominance, Carney remained composed, strategic, and focused. He wasn't there to entertain. He was there to lead. Carney didn't need a podium to prove his strength. His calm tone carried weight, because it came from someone who understood the stakes better than anyone. His message? Crystal clear. We don't match chaos with chaos. We protect our people by staying resilient. But beneath that calm exterior was a nation bracing for impact. Canadians were feeling the pressure, and Carney knew that waiting for Trump to come around wasn't an option. The economy was under siege. Trust in the U.S. was collapsing. And behind closed doors, a quiet but powerful plan was already taking shape. Because Carney understood something critical. You don't beat a wrecking ball by standing still. You move smarter, not louder. It didn't take long for Canada to respond. Inside Parliament, former MP Charlie Angus stood before the nation and didn't hold back. He called Donald Trump exactly what many Canadians were already whispering: a convicted felon, a predator, and a threat to Canadian sovereignty.
This is full-on police state tyranny, President Donald Trump. And this is the man who will soon be crossing our border to attend the G7 meetings in Canada.
His words weren't cautious. They were a warning, delivered with urgency and fire. But this fury wasn't contained to Parliament Hill, across the country, from Vancouver to Halifax, in cities, suburbs, and small towns. thousands of Canadians poured into the streets. Their signs didn't ask for compromise. They demanded strength. The movement was called No Kings, and it wasn't just another protest. It was a national uprising against economic blackmail, authoritarian arrogance, and the insult of being treated like a dependent. This wasn't about left or right. This was about dignity. And Canadians had had enough. They weren't just pushing back against Trump's tariffs. They were rejecting everything he represented: the intimidation, the bullying, the disdain for democracy. This wasn't political anymore. This was personal. Canadians hadn't forgotten. The last time Donald Trump came to the G7, back in 2018, hosted in Quebec, the summit turned into a global embarrassment. Instead of building cooperation, Trump stormed off, furious, mid-conference. From the safety of Air Force One, he launched a digital attack on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, calling him dishonest and weak in front of the entire world. It wasn't just a tantrum. It was a humiliation, and Canada took the hit. The G7, meant to showcase unity among the world's leading democracies, was hijacked by one man's ego. And that moment didn't just stain Canada's reputation. It changed how the world viewed Trump's diplomacy: reckless, hostile, and entirely self-serving. Mark Carney wasn't Prime Minister then, but he was watching. And this time, as host, he wasn't going to let history repeat itself. He understood exactly what was at stake, and that if Canada didn't take control of the narrative, Trump would do it for them. Again. So Mark Carney made a bold, unprecedented move, one that stunned even seasoned diplomats. He scrapped the traditional G7 communiqué, the joint statement every country usually signs at the summit's conclusion. Why? Because with Trump in the room, it was a ticking time bomb. Back in 2018, the communiqué became the target of Trump's outrage. One line about climate change or trade was enough to set off a storm of insults and derail the entire summit. Carney wasn't about to hand him that opportunity again. Instead, he changed the rules entirely. This time, each country would issue single-issue agreements, focused statements on topics like climate action, fair trade, or global security. If a country agreed, they signed on. If they didn't, they sat it out. It was clean, flexible, and most importantly, Trump-proof. Without a central document to sabotage, Trump had nothing to tear down, no scene to steal, no drama to spark. And that silence? It spoke volumes. It was quiet. It was tactical. And it worked. While Trump looked for headlines, Carney protected progress and ensured that the summit stayed on track, with or without the noise. But Mark Carney didn't act alone. While Trump was busy rallying his base and lobbing threats on social media, Carney was working behind the scenes, quietly but deliberately. In the weeks leading up to the summit, he built a coalition: France, the UK, Germany. Even some hesitant allies were brought into the fold. He wasn't just prepping Canada's strategy. He was building a shield. If Trump tried to isolate Canada, Carney made sure it would backfire. Because when the summit began, Canada wasn't standing alone. It stood with a united front of global powers who were tired of being strong-armed and insulted. And in that moment, something shifted. Canada wasn't acting like the polite, deferential neighbor anymore. It was asserting itself, not with volume, but with vision. That alliance gave Canada a new kind of power, not as a junior partner, not as a background player, but as a nation willing to lead, and to push back when it mattered most. And Trump? For once, he wasn't in control of the room. Still, some critics asked the question, was this too soft? Was Mark Carney just avoiding a fight? The answer? Absolutely not. Carney wasn't sidestepping conflict. He was outmaneuvering it. Trump thrives on chaos. He weaponizes drama, baiting others into emotional reactions so he can dominate the headlines. But Carney didn't take the bait. Instead, he turned calm into a tactical shield. Where Trump chased attention, Carney chased outcomes. One man wanted the spotlight. The other wanted solutions. And that difference made all the difference. Because for Canada, this wasn't just about trade. It was something deeper, something personal. As former MP Charlie Angus put it plainly, this isn't just about trade. It's about identity. Trump's attacks weren't random. They were calculated, aimed squarely at Canada's values: diversity, equity, and inclusion. The principles that define the country weren't just being challenged, they were being targeted. And while Trump saw those values as weakness, Canadians saw them for what they truly are: strength. That's why this G7 wasn't just a test of policy. It was a test of character, and of how far a nation will go to defend not just its economy, but its soul. So where does this leave us? Trump came to the G7 expecting another spectacle, another opportunity to dominate, divide, and detonate whatever unity was left among global powers. But what he found instead was a country that had outgrown the act. Canada didn't fold. It adapted. It didn't shout back. It strategized. It didn't match chaos with chaos. It held the line with calm, calculated strength. This wasn't a retreat. It was a rebellion, a quiet one. But make no mistake, it was real. Canada is no longer playing the sidekick in someone else's show. It's setting the tone, leading with principle, and refusing to be treated like a pawn on America's political chessboard. It resisted, with unity, not division, with diplomacy, not drama, with dignity, not submission. And the message to Trump, and to the world, is crystal clear. This is our country. We don't bend, we don't beg, and we won't be bullied.